Welcome to Nathenstein, home of horrors. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Echoes in the viscera. Greystone's nightmare had only just begun. Weeks after the first disappearances, the town was a shadow of its former self. Streets lay deserted, homes abandoned in a frantic scramble to escape. The police force was decimated, some missing, others found in incomprehensible states. The viscous monsters had turned their world upside down, and nothing could stop them. Captain Maria Holloway stood on the shattered threshold of the ruined precinct, her hands trembling around a shotgun that felt useless against the horror they faced. Her officers' bodies had been discovered strewn in the streets, their flesh melted and fused with the oily black substance that now coated everything. The monsters were not just flesh and slime, they were a living corruption, a spreading plague of viscera and teeth. The creatures emerged from the sewers, the underground tunnels, the very walls of the town. Their skin was like a sickening blend of tar and coagulated blood, constantly shifting and dripping. Each monster bore dozens of mismatched eyes, some blinking in and out of existence, others permanently staring into the abyss, their mouths opened impossibly wide, rows of serrated teeth grinding with a sick wet sound that made Maria's stomach churn. Bullets shattered against their gelatinous bodies like stones against water. Molotov cocktails only made them angrier, their slime bubbling and thickening into acidic pools that hissed against the concrete. No traps held them, no barricade could stop the tide of viscous death advancing. Maria's radio crackled with static. "We're losing contact with the North Patrol. They're saying the monsters aren't just attacking, they're assimilating. The slime, it gets inside, takes over, turns people into them." The horrors were not mindless beasts, but a hive of malevolent intelligence. They stalked their prey with precision, using the shadows and the sickly slick surfaces they left behind as extensions of their own will. As night fell, Maria led a small band of survivors, officers, and civilians, through the labyrinthine streets, now slick with thick black goo that clung to their boots and slowed their every step. The distant sirens wailed mockingly, useless cries for help that would never come. Suddenly, the monsters struck from every direction. The viscous horrors erupted, tendrils slithered from walls, coiling around ankles and dragging victims into gaping mouths that opened in impossible shapes. A survivor's scream cut off abruptly as his body convulsed, the slime dissolving skin and bone, reshaping him into a grotesque spawn. Maria fired blindly, desperation fueling her shots, but the monsters absorbed the blasts. One beast lunged, its slimy jaws snapping inches from her face. Before she slammed the butt of her shotgun into its gelatinous skull, it bubbled and reformed instantly. They ran, hearts hammering, lungs burning in the toxic air. But the monsters were endless, and every alleyway led to another swarm of viscous death. The town had become a prison, and the police, the last line of defense, were broken, powerless to save what remained. In the depths of the ruined precinct, Maria found a sealed door she hadn't noticed before. Behind it lay a dark, underground chamber filled with arcane symbols smeared in blood and slime. Ancient manuscripts lay scattered, revealing that Greystone's founders had imprisoned a primordial viscous entity centuries ago, a parasitic horror feeding on flesh and fear. The town's corruption was a slow resurrection of that ancient evil, and the police force's failure was its carefully crafted design. With no hope of reinforcements, Maria knew what had to be done. Using the last of the ancient rites, she began a desperate ritual to banish the entity back into the viscous void. But as she chanted, the shadows deepened. The slime seeped through cracks and crevices, licking at her skin, whispering promises of power and oblivion. Her vision blurred, and the monstrous eyes closed in. The last sound she heard was the wet, grinding teeth of the viscous horrors closing around her, swallowing her screams and the fading echoes of the sirens that once symbolized hope. Greystone was lost. The viscous monsters had won. The police were powerless, the law extinguished, and all that remained was the endless, hungry darkness. When the sirens failed, in the quiet town of Greystone, people trusted their police. They believed officers were the shield against every danger until the night the monsters came. It started with strange disappearances. At first, a few hikers lost in the nearby woods. Then a family vanishing without a trace. Calls flooded the police station, but the officers were puzzled. No signs of struggle, no footprints, no clues. One evening, Officer Daniels responded to a frantic call from a farm on the outskirts. When he arrived, he found the house torn apart, walls smeared with thick, dark slime that glistened under his flashlight. The air reeked of decay and something far worse. Before he could radio for backup, a guttural growl erupted behind him. He spun to see a towering, grotesque creature slithering out of the shadows. Its skin was wet and translucent, like coagulated oil mixed with flesh, dripping constantly. Multiple eyes blinked unevenly across its distorted face, and rows of needle-sharp teeth snapped hungrily. Daniels fired his weapon, but the bullets seemed to melt into the creature's viscous body, leaving no mark. The beast lunged with impossible speed, dragging Daniels screaming into the darkness. Word spread fast. Police squads were dispatched, but each encounter ended the same. The monsters, viscous, slimy, and horrifying, were impervious to bullets and traps. They moved like nightmares made flesh, oozing through cracks, walls, even sewers, attacking without mercy. The town's sirens wailed endlessly, but no help came. Calls for reinforcements to neighboring cities were met with silence. The monsters seemed to know the police strategies before they acted. Radios went dead, vehicles stalled, fear strangled hope. Desperate, a small group of survivors, armed with nothing but knives and flashlights, banded together. They realized the monsters hunted not just flesh, but the town's very will, sapping strength and sanity by sheer presence. The police station became a tomb. Officers barricaded themselves inside, but even steel and guns couldn't keep the slime beasts out. Through the cracks, tendrils of dark ooze seeped in, corrupting everything they touched. As the survivors fled into the forest, the monsters followed relentlessly. Police sirens faded into distant echoes, symbols of a protection long lost. Greystone was swallowed whole by fear and slime. No one came to help. No law enforced justice here. In the end, the monsters weren't just hunting bodies. They were consuming the idea of safety itself. And when the last light died, only the viscous monsters remained, waiting silently for the next town to call for help. Black Ooze. The town of Miller's Creek was the kind of place people moved to when they wanted peace. A small cluster of houses hugged by dense, ancient forest and bisected by a lazy river that had fed the community for generations. Folks knew each other by name, and Sheriff Tom Bennett was as familiar a face as the cracked leather on his worn-out badge. But peace had a price, and that price was about to be paid in viscous black horror. It began innocuously enough. One late summer morning, old Mrs. Harlow's cat disappeared near the riverbank. Then a group of teenagers camping by the water noticed the once clear stream was thick with a strange, oily sludge that clung to their boots and clothes. The fish died in waves, floating belly up with eyes wide in silent terror. The smell came next to choking stench, like burnt rubber and rotting flesh that drifted with the wind and settled into every crevice of the town. Sheriff Bennett's deputies went out to investigate, flashlights in hand. They approached the river as dusk fell, the air thick with oppressive heat and the sour tang of decay. Suddenly, shapes emerged from the sludge, twisted, dripping figures that moved with unnatural speed and malice. Their skin was a horrid fusion of oily slime and raw flesh, glistening and constantly shifting, limbs elongated and retracted as if they had no bone or muscle, only wet, pulsing tissue. Eyes appeared and disappeared across their contorted faces, and their gaping maws emitted wet, guttural growls as rows of jagged teeth snapped hungrily. The officers fired their weapons, but bullets passed harmlessly through the creature's gelatinous forms. One beast lunged at Deputy Alvarez, seizing him with dripping tendrils and pulling him screaming into the Black River. The slime closed over his cries, muffling them until silence reigned. Panic rippled through the police force. Radios crackled with frantic, disjointed calls. The town was drowning in nightmare. The black ooze spread fast, faster than anyone imagined possible. Roads buckled under its weight. Trees blackened and withered, and every surface it touched seemed to come alive. The viscous trail left by the monsters hissed and bubbled, dissolving everything organic: grass, insects, even small animals into a growing mass of sentient slime. Sheriff Bennett rallied his remaining officers and townsfolk, but each attempt to push back was met with slaughter. The monsters were everywhere, oozing from cracks in walls, bursting through sewers, and slipping under doors. No barricade could hold against their relentless advance. In the darkness, the survivors heard things that no human should ever hear. Wet, sucking sounds as the monsters fed, tortured groans as victims were twisted into new horrors, and a low, wet chorus of alien voices whispering in an ancient, impossible language that turned the brave to trembling madness. The police station became the last refuge, a fortress surrounded by black slime that clung like death itself. Inside, officers and citizens huddled, their faces pale and eyes wide with terror. Yet the ooze seeped in, creeping up the walls, dripping from the ceiling. Those touched by it writhed and screamed, their bodies melting into the blackness, emerging moments later as viscous monsters, themselves contorted parodies of their former selves, their minds lost to the hive of slime. Sheriff Bennett fought on, but the hopelessness was crushing. He watched as his best friend, Deputy Jenkins, was consumed, his screams echoing as his flesh melted into the creeping darkness. Days passed without sunlight or fresh air. The sirens, once a symbol of safety and order, became a cruel mockery, wailing endlessly outside as the town was consumed. No help came from beyond Miller's Creek's borders. The roads were impassable, the communications dead. One night, in the shattered remains of the sheriff's office, Bennett found an old journal buried beneath the floorboards. Its pages told a horrific truth. Miller's Creek had been built on a site cursed centuries ago, a prison for a primordial entity of viscous darkness that fed on fear and flesh. The black ooze was its resurrection, a living plague that would consume everything until nothing remained but slime and silence. With the last of his strength, Bennett devised a desperate plan, a ritual from the journal, meant to seal the entity once again. But the ritual required a sacrifice. As the viscous horde breached the final barricade, Bennett held the town's fate in trembling hands. The slime wrapped around him like a living nightmare, tendrils probing, searching. The last thing Bennett saw was the endless, pulsing mass of black ice staring into his soul before the darkness swallowed him whole. Miller's Creek ceased to exist, erased by a viscous nightmare that laughed in silence, waiting for the next town to fall.